Thank you. I feel my brain is quite addled. I think the last couple of days there's been a lot going on here, and for somebody like me, a career journalist who thinks of almost everything in the form of a story, there's so many stories here, and I think Drummond said the right thing. The challenge is, how do you get these stories out? And I think that, when you think about what we've seen and heard, I think 25, 30, 35 speakers, if this was condensed into an hour and a half or an hour of a documentary, it would be quite powerful. How do you do that? Everybody here who spoke is a leader in their own right, and they tend to work in their own niches. This panel and everybody on it is trying to think about how to reach audience, create technologies for audience so that there can be impact. And that's what this is really all about, what I'm trying to do. I think that this comes down to leadership, and what we've seen here is a tremendous amount of leadership and all the different spectrums of it. I think in terms of understanding about leadership, you should know a little bit about the forces that created the leader or things that happened in their life. I'm going to talk about my story. The first time I walked into a newsroom, it was the summer of 1969 in the New York Times. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was 21 years old. It was a summer job. It was the summer of Chappaquiddick. It was the summer of the moonshot. It was the summer of Woodstock. I worked on the moonshot desk at the New York Times, which then put out a paper, a special edition at 3 a.m. when men landed on the moon. I was completely hooked in the energy and the passion and the creativity of what was then the best newspaper in the world. It was totally, anything could happen. You had to react. You had to be quick, and I love chaos. The next year, I came back as a copy boy when I graduated college, and within 6 months, I was the editorial assistant on the Pentagon Papers project. I literally Xeroxed the entire Pentagon Papers on a machine that was probably half the size of this platform that emanated a green light, and I would be sent to Punch Sulzberger's office at midnight because they didn't want anyone to see it, with satchels, and I'd stand there with this green machine, which I was sure sterilized me. It didn't. I have 3 kids. But I was 22 years old, and I'd be standing there, and I'd say, "Top secret, for your eyes only, Secretary of Defense to the President of the United States." And I kept going, holy shit, holy shit. And I understood something then, that journalism or newspapers and reporters could really make a difference. I didn't know what would happen with that story. I really had a ringside seat. The team was put in the Hilton Hotel. I had a room with 2 huge filing cases with the Pentagon Papers, and I had to manage and figure it out. The night that the Nixon administration enjoined the Times from publishing, I was in a room with the entire brass of the New York Times, holding a phone line open to Tony Lewis in London, because Punch Sulzberger, the publisher, decided to go on vacation, even with all the shit flying. So I was on a line with Tony Lewis, and I'd say, "Is he there yet?" No. Meanwhile, the hierarchy of the New York Times was having a seminal debate about the role of the press in America versus the government. And I sat there and listened to the entire thing, and they basically decided to publish because of the public's right to know. That was really the launching point for my career. I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. I wanted to cover wars. I did that for the Philadelphia Inquirer. I worked in Africa and the Middle East. I did a lot of investigative reporting. And at the Philadelphia Inquirer, when I came there, you could do anything. That was what you felt like you could do as a journalist. The sky was the limit. You were there to hold the powerful accountable. That was one of the key roles, whether it was government, corporate people, malfeasance anywhere on a local, state, or national level, and you believed you could do it. That is the model for really where I am today. But what happened to me, my misfortune was I got picked to be an editor. I came back from being a foreign correspondent, and Gene Roberts, who was a very well-known editor, asked me to be the foreign editor in charge of all the foreign correspondents. I said, no way. He said, why don't you try it for a year? I did it. I loved it. I had a big map of the world over my desk, and I called it the first year, the year of living vicariously, because I really loved being a foreign correspondent. I became the editor of the Inquirer in 1998. At that point, the Inquirer's profit margins were about 22, 23%. It was owned by a chain called Knight Ridder, which was out here in San Jose. They were printing money. On Sundays, if you remember the 1999, 2000, papers like the Inquirer would have 80 to 100 pages of classified ads. Each page for the Philadelphia Inquirer is $50,000 in revenue. Multiply that over the course of a year. Just from the classifieds, it was $220, $250 million in revenue. It vanished. The people who ran the newspapers, I learned, much to my chagrin, I guess, were in a total cultural clash with what I call the creators, people like me. It was all about profit. Journalists don't get into journalism to make money. They do it because they're driven, they're passionate, and they want to make a difference. I basically got fired. I didn't basically get fired. I got fired. At the end of 2001, after the Inquirer was downsized, when I started as editor, I had 630 people in the newsroom and a budget of $75 to $80 million. Over the course of that last year, there were 2 buyouts. They wanted to get the profit margin to 25% and then 30%, and the only way they could think of doing it was getting rid of the journalists, really. And what they wanted to do was get rid of the most highly paid, most respected, best people, because it was just going to fall to the bottom line. One quick story. People think that, in my experience, I never was told not to do a story because of politics or influence. I was pushed, I was challenged, but I never was forced to stop. But this is what happened to big media. In the spring of 2001, I had a reporter named David Zucchino who's won a Pulitzer Prize, and I knew from his work, he had actually won the year before, we had decided to find Semil Bashayev, the leader of the Chechens, the #1 terrorist in the world at that point. And I knew Zook could do it, and I said, Zook, you don't have to do this, but I want you to go to Chechnya, and I want you to drive around, and I want you to go to all the Chechen checkpoints and say, I want to see Basayev. And I don't think they'll kill you. I think they'll think you're crazy, and drive around for about a week or 10 days, and if they want you to see him, they will come find you. After about 10 days, he was sleeping in some farm, and 5 guys run in with masks, AK-47s, and say, come. He came. He ended up being the only journalist ever to interview Basayev, and it was a front-page story, and it was a really amazing story about who he was and what he was doing, and just also about how to get there. In the spring of 2001, I said to Zook, let's go and see what's happening in Afghanistan because of bin Laden and Taliban. I understood what was happening, the whole threat. It was a story that really wasn't told if you think back. I knew it was incredibly dangerous and risky, but he was willing to do it. I went to my publisher, and this was at a time where any penny I wanted to spend beyond my budget, everything was being cut, I had to go to him. Normally, I wouldn't have even told him. But I explained the whole thing and why I thought we could do it, and he looked at me and said, who gives a fuck about Afghanistan? 4 months later, 9/11 happens. But that was the kind of thing that's happened, and it's gone on and accelerated. If the Bush administration had come into power as an agenda to disembowel and eviscerate mass media in this country and the role it plays in terms of the watchdog, he could not have done it better. There are literally probably half the journalists in this country today than there were in the year 2000. In the Bay Area, there are less than half. The Inquirer has about 300 people right now. The Washington Post just went through a round of buyouts where they paid their most experienced and best journalists to leave. A lot of money. The LA Times is half the size it was 4 years ago. There is a huge crisis in this country around media, which gets me to why, when I got fired again from the Chronicle, where I came to try and make a difference after the Inquirer 5 years ago. I left last spring. I really had a couple of very easy and very well paid jobs on the East Coast in newspapers. I decided I really wanted to do something different. So when the Center for Investigative Reporting offered me a job, I decided to do it. The Center for Investigative Reporting has been around 30 years. It's done a lot of incredible work. But now is the time to try new things. Everybody in this panel is doing that, and there are a lot of things going on in nonprofit journalism. I absolutely believe that the new model is going to have to be forged with alliances between the money, wherever that comes from, and the creators in a way where they understand the goal. And the goal is impact. The goal is to make a difference. The goal is to inform the public. The Center for Investigative Reporting has been small. I basically have spent the last 7 months trying to grow it, do the work, and also what we are going to do, and I think a lot of people are doing this, it's not just our idea, is completely think about how to reach audience with content and stories. And do it in a way where you create teams of people, and this looks to the future, and where I get my momentum from is a new model, but to reach audience, not just locally, globally, but nationally. With the tools we have in terms of technology, you can have a huge difference, I believe, in terms of informing the public and drive policy and drive the public to act. So if you conceive of doing the right story where it's delivered almost simultaneously in a documentary, whether it's on television, in a film, a general release film, with multimedia supporting it, with print, with podcasts, with video clips broken out. You know, I talked to Alex Gibney about A Taxi to the Dark Side. That's obscene that that film has not been seen by a mass audience in this country. It is really wrong. You know, he did not start that film with small video clips, whether they could go on somebody's cell phone or however they're going to use it. The next time he does a film, he'll probably do that. I'm doing a film now, which we hope will be very successful around climate change, but it's going to be sent out in a way, I don't care how people get the story. You have to let the audience decide how they're going to get it. And I think that's really part of the new model going forward. In doing that, it's really a different idea, and a lot of it will be done through collaborations. I'm not going to have enough people to do all these things, but through collaborations with big media, with small media, with websites, with other organizations that know how to get the story, this can be done. The model of collaboration did not exist. When I was the editor of the Inquirer, I did not want to collaborate. I had 630 people. I had Bartlett and Steele. I had Pulitzer Prize winners around the room. I could get it done. It has completely changed because of the downsizing. I'm talking to the Washington Post. I'm talking to everybody. They want to collaborate. They all want content. So there's a huge opportunity now created by the new technologies. The other day we heard Peter talk about this convergence and talked about the one-penny newspaper and then the radio and how technology melded with all the forces that were created globally and all the problems created change. We are now in the time of, I think, the greatest opportunity to disseminate and inform the public that's ever existed on a global scale. And I'm incredibly excited about it. It's extremely difficult, but it's absolutely crucial. I want to talk about one story we're doing to sort of explain the model. Shortly after I joined the center, I got a phone call from a guy named John Fleming in a paper called the Anniston Star in Anniston, Alabama. And he had found out that a sheriff somewhere in Alabama was a former Klansman who had actually been involved, he believes, in killing blacks during the Civil Rights era. He did not know how to do. He didn't know how to get the Freedom of Information Act. He needed help going after the FBI files around this. I found out that there were other journalists doing the same thing. I went to Jackson, Mississippi, and this is where I get my momentum and some of my inspiration, where I met with 4 journalists, all who work for very small newspapers throughout the South, some of whom have been very effective at bringing people to justice. They are completely focused on this. One of the men is named Stanley Nelson. He runs a weekly newspaper in a place called Faraday, Louisiana, which is a small parish opposite Natchez on the Mississippi. Stanley wrote a story in his paper a few weeks ago, or no, I'm sorry, about 8 months ago, about a firebombing in a cobbler's shop in 1968 where a man he knew, he was a little boy, was found burned to death in his shop. He got a tip, or someone told him, that actually that guy may have been murdered. He got some FBI files, heavily redacted, but he learned enough to realize that this had probably been a planned killing by the Klan. He wrote a small story in his newspaper. As a result, all the whites in the parish were like outraged. Why are you dredging this up? But the black people, and some people he'd known his whole life, some had worked with him, some were his friends, came to him and told him other stories. One man he'd known his own life came to him and said, "Do you know about my 3 sisters?" He said, "No, I didn't even know you had 3 sisters." And he told him that on the day before Thanksgiving, in November 1968, he had been at home when the sheriff came and brought the bodies of his 3 sisters. They'd all been drowned in a pond. It was a cold, windy day. They'd never been in a rowboat in their entire lives, and they didn't fish. The sheriff told them they were out fishing in a rowboat, and it capsized. One of the girls was naked. The other just had her panties on. People heard screaming. Stanley wondered what the hell happened. He looked and found some files that, again, heavily redacted, that indicated that a group called the Silver Dollar Klansmen had been involved in the killing. When the man told Stanley the story, he looked at Stanley and said, "The killers are walking among us." So basically, this is a new media idea, model. We are going to put together, and we're trying to do this, a story not only about these killings we've discovered through these 3 journalists that have never been accounted for in this country during the Civil Rights era, and do the stories not only as films, but as print stories, but also create the definitive digital archive on the victims of the civil rights era and house it at a black university. It's a huge idea. I'm trying to get it done. But I'm just telling you that story because you would not do this in a traditional newsroom. You would not even think of doing this. But the necessity for me of doing the story, and the necessity that drives probably the other speakers, is going to create new ideas and new ways of doing things that did not exist. So out of all this chaos, there is huge opportunity to impact that. That, if we pull that off, it will involve students. It will involve students from Howard University, Syracuse University, other universities, and be a huge teaching tool for this country about reconciliation and about what really happened. Work has been done around that. I'm not saying it hasn't been done, but if we get a new president, who we think we're going to get, or we hope we're going to get, it is going to be really important. The issue of race is undercurrent of everything that we do in this society. So that type of storytelling will have to be done through huge collaborations that never existed before. But the goal is impact, change, and inform the public, which are the most traditional roles in this country of the press. I'm going to end this by quoting Thomas Jefferson, who 200 years ago, and it's totally applicable today. His language is a little different than we'd speak, but you'll get the point. I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion. Thank you.